Sam looked at Eric irritably. The intensity of Eric's gaze made the direction in which he looked terrible, for Sam had his back to it. He scrambled round the fire, squatted by Eric, and looked to see. They became motionless, gripped in each other's arms, 4 unwinking eyes aimed and 2 mouths open. Far beneath them, the trees of the forest sighed, then roared. The hair on their foreheads fluttered, and flames blew out sideways from the fire. 15 yards away from them came the plopping noise of fabric blown open. What do you think that is? Neither of the boys screamed, but the grip of their arms tightened and their mouths grew peaked. For perhaps 10 seconds they crouched like that while the flailing fire sent smoke and sparks and waves of inconstant light over the top of the mountain. Then, as though they had been one terrified mind between them, they scrambled away over the rocks and fled. Ralph was dreaming. He had fallen asleep after what seemed hours of tossing and turning noisily among the dry leaves. Even the sounds of the nightmare from the other shelters no longer reached him, for he was back to where he came from, feeding the ponies with sugar over the garden wall. So when they say he was back to where he came from and he's dreaming, what do you think that means? Because we know he's on the island, right? So he's having a dream. And apparently, where he lives, he was feeding ponies with sugar over a garden wall. Then someone was shaking his arm, telling him that it was time for tea. "Ralph, wake up!" The leaves were roaring like the sea. "Ralph, wake up! What's the matter? We saw the beast plane. Who are you? The twins? We saw the beast." "Quiet, Piggy." The leaves were roaring still. Piggy bumped into him, and a twin grabbed him as he made for the oblong of paling stars. "You can't go out. It's horrible." "Piggy, where are the spears? I can hear them." "Quiet then. Lie still." They lay there listening, at first with doubt, but then with terror to the description of the twins breathed at them, between bouts of extreme silence. Soon the darkness was full of claws, full of the awful unknown and menace. An interminable dawn faded the stars out, and at last light, sad and gray, filtered into the shelter. They began to stir, though still the world outside the shelter was impossibly dangerous. The maze of the darkness sorted into near and far, and at the high point of the sky the cloudlets were warmed with color. A single seabird flapped upwards with a hoarse cry that was echoed presently, and something squawked in the forest. Now streaks of cloud near the horizon began to glow rosily, and feathery tops of the palms were green. Ralph knelt in the entrance to the shelter and peered cautiously round him. "Sam and Eric." "Call them to an assembly. Quietly. Go on." The twins, holding tremulously to each other, dared the few yards to the next shelter and spread the dreadful news. Ralph stood up, walked for the sake of dignity, though with his back pricking to the platform. Piggy and Simon followed him, and the other boys came sneaking after. Ralph took the conch from where it lay on the polished seat and held it to his lips, but then he hesitated and did not blow. He held the shell instead showed it to them, and they understood. The rays of the sun that were fanning upwards from below the horizon swung downwards to eye level. Ralph looked for a moment at the growing slice of gold that lit them from the right hand and seemed to make speech possible. The circle of boys before him bristled with hunting spears. He handed the conch to Eric, the nearest of the twins. "We've seen the beast with our own eyes. No, we weren't asleep." Sam took up the story. But custom now, one conch did for both twins, for their substantial unity was recognized. It was furry. There was something moving behind its head. Wings. The beast moved too. That was awful. It kind of sat up. The fire was bright. We just made it up. More sticks on. There were eyes, teeth, claws. We ran as fast as we could, bashed into things. The beast followed us. I saw it slinking behind the trees, nearly touched me. Ralph pointed fearfully at Eric's face, which was striped with scars where the bushes had torn him. How did you do that? Eric felt his face. I'm all rough. Am I bleeding? The circle of boys shrank away in horror. Johnny, yawning still, burst into noisy tears and was slapped by Bill till he choked on them. The bright morning was full of threats, and the circle began to change. It faced out rather than in, and the spears of sharpened wood were like a fence. Jack called them back to the center. This'll be a real hunt. Who will come? Ralph moved impatiently. These spears are made of wood. Don't be silly. Jack sneered at him. Frightened? Of course I'm frightened. Who wouldn't be? He turned to the twins, yearning but hopeless. I suppose you aren't pulling our legs. The reply was too emphatic for anyone to doubt them. Piggy took the conch. Couldn't we kind of stay here? Maybe the beast won't come near us. But for the sense of something watching them, Ralph would have shouted at him, Stay here and be cramped into this bit of the island, always on the lookout? How shall we get our food? And what about the fire? Let's be moving, said Jack relentlessly. We're wasting time. No, we're not. What about the little ones? Sucks to the little ones. Someone's got to look after them. Nobody has so far. There was no need. Now there is. Piggy'll look after them. That's right. Keep Piggy out of danger. Have some sense. What can Piggy do with only one eye? The rest of the boys were looking from Jack to Ralph curiously. And another thing, you can't have an ordinary hunt because the beast doesn't leave tracks. If it did, you would have seen them. For all we know, the beast may swing through the trees like what's its name? They nodded. So we've got to think. Can you guys think of what's his name? Tarzan? Anyone know about Tarzan? Okay, I bet you do. And if you don't, it's because it was a very long time ago. Piggy took off his damaged glasses and cleaned the remaining lens. How about us, Ralph? You haven't got the conch. Here. How about us? Suppose the beast comes when you're all away. I can't see proper, and if I get scared, Jack broke in contemptuously. You're always scared. I got the conch. Conch, conch, shouted Jack. We don't need the conch anymore. We know who ought to say things. What good did Simon do speaking, or Bill, or Walter? It's time some people knew they've got to keep quiet and leave deciding things to the rest of us. Ralph could no longer ignore his speech. The blood was hot in his cheeks. You haven't got the conch, he said. Sit down. Jack's face went so white that the freckles showed as clear brown flecks. He licked his lips and remained standing. This is a hunter's job. The rest of the boys watched intently. Piggy, finding himself uncomfortably embroiled, slid the conch to Ralph's knees and sat down. The silence grew oppressive, and Piggy held his breath. This is more than a hunter's job, said Ralph at last, because you can't track the beast. And don't you want to be rescued? He turned to the assembly. Don't you all want to be rescued? He looked back at Jack. I said before, the fire is the main thing. Now the fire must be out. The old exasperation saved him and gave him the energy to attack. Hasn't anyone got any sense? We've got to relight the fire. You never thought of that, Jack, did you? Or don't any of you want to be rescued? Yes, they wanted to be rescued. There was no doubt about that. And with a violent swing to Ralph's side, the crisis paused. So if you notice here, He almost loses control, right? As the leader. And that's what he's been struggling with between himself and Jack. Piggy let out his breath with a gasp, reached for it again, and failed. He lay against a log, his mouth gaping, blue shadows creeping round his lips. Nobody minded him, meaning that he's probably having some kind of asthma attack, and no one's really helping poor Piggy. Now think, Jack, is there anywhere on the island you haven't been? Unknowingly, Jack answered, There's only... But of course, you remember the tail end part, where the rocks are all piled up. I've been near there. The rock makes a sort of bridge. There's only one way up, and the thing might live there. All the assembly talked at once. Quiet. All right. That's where we'll look. If the beast isn't there, we'll go up the mountain and look, and light the fire. Let's go. We'll eat first, then go, Ralph paused. We'd better take spears. After they had eaten, Ralph and the big uns sat along the beach. They left Piggy propped up on the platform. I'm going to go ahead and pause here.